He walked into the courtroom like he'd already won. Blazer pressed, chin up, the kind of man who mistakes arrogance for confidence. He had a lawyer, a strategy, and a woman on his arm who'd helped him burn everything down. What he didn't have, what he didn't even know he was missing, was the one thing that would cost him every single thing he owned. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I want you to picture a Saturday in early April. Not the gray, muddy kind of April where the weather can't make up its mind. A real one. The kind where the air actually smells like something alive again after months of cold, and the light coming through the car windows is warm and gold and makes everything look softer than it is. We were driving home from my sister Elise's baby shower. She was 7 months along, round and glowing in that way some women just get. Like their whole body knows exactly what it's doing. The party had been at our aunt's house, yellow balloons tied to the mailbox, little sandwiches on tiered trays, the whole thing. I had taken probably 200 photos on my phone. Elise opening a tiny sleeper with ducks on it. Elise laughing with her mouth full of lemon cake. Elise with her hands resting on her belly like she was already holding her daughter. Callum was driving, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on my knee. This little unconscious thing he always did, like he just needed a point of contact. Some old Fleetwood Mac song was on the radio and he was humming along, slightly off key, and I was watching him out of the corner of my eye thinking, we really are okay, aren't we? After 7 years, we were still the couple who held hands in movie theaters, still left stupid notes on the bathroom mirror. That morning, he'd written, "You're beautiful even with the toothpaste foam beard," in blue dry erase marker. I'd added, "You're tolerable even before coffee" underneath it. My freelance graphic design business was doing better than it had ever done. I just landed 2 new corporate clients the week before, a tech startup that needed a full rebrand and a local restaurant chain that wanted new menu designs. I was working from our apartment 2 blocks from a farmer's market and a coffee shop I'd been going to every Sunday for 3 years. Life felt settled, the kind of settled you don't appreciate until it's gone. I was scrolling through the shower photos, thinking maybe Callum and I should actually start talking about kids. Not eventually anymore, actually talking about it. Elise looked so complete. I was about to text her a photo, one of her laughing with her eyes closed, when I saw the headlights. Wrong lane, coming straight at us, going way too fast. Callum said my name, just my name, Clara, and jerked the wheel hard to the right. I looked up from the phone just as the other car hit the passenger side. The police report would later say it was a 17-year-old kid who'd been texting, going nearly double the speed limit. The sound was like the world ending, metal and glass and something I couldn't name. My phone flew somewhere. The seatbelt slammed into my chest so hard I thought my ribs would just give way. And then my legs. Oh God, my legs. Pain everywhere and specifically and completely. Everything went white, then red, then nothing. I don't remember the ambulance. Don't remember the paramedics. Don't remember the emergency room or the first surgery or the second one 12 hours later when they realized it was worse than they'd thought. I just remember the car window and the light and Callum's hand on my knee, warm and easy, like everything was fine. It wasn't fine. I woke up 3 days later. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and something underneath it I couldn't name. Fear, maybe. The kind that lives permanently in places like that, soaked into the walls. My mouth was so dry my tongue felt like a piece of cardboard. My whole body felt disconnected, like I was a brain that had been placed inside someone else's body and we hadn't figured out how to work together yet. My mother was sitting in the chair by the window, crying quietly into a tissue she'd already shredded to nothing. She looked older than I remembered. Lines around her eyes I'd never really noticed before. My legs were elevated, wrapped in heavy bandages and surrounded by metal hardware that looked like it belonged on a construction site. Rods, pins. Things holding me together from the outside because the inside couldn't manage it anymore. Callum was sitting next to my bed holding my hand. He was unshaven, eyes red-rimmed, wearing a sweatshirt I recognized from the back of our closet. He'd been here. He'd stayed. When I made a sound, not a word, just a noise, his whole face changed. Like a knot coming loose. "Clara," he breathed, squeezing my hand. "Oh God, you're awake. You're finally awake." Relief, real relief, moved through me. He was here. Whatever had happened, we'd face it together. Dr. Mercer came in about 20 minutes later. 50s, short silver hair, calm the way doctors get when they've had to deliver bad news. So many times it becomes a skill. She pulled a chair up close and explained everything in measured tones, designed not to panic me. Catastrophic bilateral fractures to both femurs. She showed me the x-rays on a tablet. My legs looked like shattered ceramic, pieces held together by metal. Extensive soft tissue damage. Significant nerve involvement. They'd stabilized everything with rods and plates, but I was looking at 6 to 8 months of recovery, possibly longer. "How much longer?" I asked. My voice came out wrong, thin. She paused. Doctors never pause for good news. "Some patients regain near full mobility," she said carefully. "Others experience permanent limitations. We won't know your specific outcome until we see how you progress through physical therapy." The room went quiet. My mother made a small, choking sound. I stared at the x-rays. Might walk normally again, might not, might need a cane forever, might never be the same. Callum squeezed my hand harder, looked at Dr. Mercer with this fierce, steady expression. "Whatever she needs," he said. "Physical therapy, home modifications, anything. We'll handle it together. She is not doing this alone." My mother started crying harder, but in a different way, relieved. Callum's parents arrived an hour later, and his father stood in the hallway and said, "You raised a good man," to my mother, and she nodded like it was the truest thing she'd ever heard. I believed it. Believed the hand holding mine. Believed the determination in his voice. Believed that 7 years of marriage meant something when everything else came apart at the seams. That was my first mistake. 3 weeks after the accident, they discharged me, both legs in heavy casts from hip to ankle. A wheelchair had been delivered to our apartment the day before. Callum had spent the previous week rearranging furniture. I know because Joanna had been there helping him, and she told me after, said he'd moved things 3 different times trying to get the pathways right. He'd moved our bedroom setup to the living room because I couldn't manage stairs, bought a shower chair, installed grab bars in the bathroom, had the whole setup ready. When our families helped get me through the front door that first afternoon, I looked around at the rearranged living room and felt something I can only describe as the specific warmth of being taken care of. The couch was against the new wall. My work laptop was set up on a TV tray table so I could reach it from the wheelchair. He put my favorite blanket on the arm of the couch. Little things. Deliberate things. Callum was attentive that first week in a way that felt solid and real. He adjusted the pillows behind my back without being asked, brought me water before I had to request it, made coffee the way I liked it, 2 spoons of the good Ethiopian beans ground fresh, a little oat milk, no sugar, and set it on the tray table every morning by 8. He sat with me in the evenings. We watched 3 seasons of a cooking competition show we'd been meaning to start for years. His mother came over twice that first week with food. My mother came over almost every day. Everyone was orbiting me with careful, gentle attention, the way you do around something fragile. I started working again from the wheelchair. Light stuff, emails, revisions, a logo update for a client I'd been putting off. It hurt to sit upright for long stretches, but the mental focus helped. Having something I could control helped. I thought, okay, this is going to be long and painful and hard, but we're going to come out of it. Couples come out of things like this. They do it all the time. I told myself that a lot in those early weeks. I should have paid more attention to how hard I was working to believe it. It started small. That's always how it starts. Week 5. Callum came home from work at 7:30 instead of 6. Didn't explain why. I didn't ask. I told myself he was tired, the commute was bad, work was stressful. He'd been handling everything alone while I couldn't do much beyond sit in a chair and answer emails. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, the way you do when you've been married long enough to know that people have bad stretches and you wait them out. Week 6. He stopped making the coffee in the morning. I woke up and the kitchen was quiet and empty. I told myself he must have left early, had a morning meeting, forgot. I made it myself, which was an entire production involving the wheelchair, reaching the counter, trying not to spill anything on my casts. I had to position the chair just right, brace myself, reach up to the cabinet where the beans were stored. It took 3 times as long as it used to. I managed. I always managed. But I noticed. The first time I tried to bring it up, he was standing at the kitchen counter eating toast over the sink. A Tuesday morning, early. I'd already been awake for an hour. "Hey," I said, "is something going on with you?" He turned, looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. You seem distant. Are you okay? Are we okay?" He put the last of the toast in his mouth, chewed, swallowed. "I'm fine," he said. "Just tired." "Okay," I said. If something's bothering you, you can tell me." He looked at me then, really looked, for just a second. And I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt, exactly, more like irritation, like I was asking for something unreasonable. I said, "I'm fine, Clara," he said, and he put his plate in the sink and left for work. He started giving short answers to everything. "How was your day?" "Fine." "Did you eat?" "Yeah." "Do you want to watch something tonight?" "I'm tired." And then he'd go to our actual bedroom, upstairs where I couldn't follow with the wheelchair, and close the door. I was sleeping in the living room alone, which had made sense at the beginning for practical reasons. Now it felt like something else. I told myself he needed space, that caregiving was exhausting, that I should be patient, that he was dealing with a level of stress I couldn't fully see from my chair. I ran through every generous interpretation I could find. He's overwhelmed. He doesn't know how to handle this. He loves me, but he doesn't know how to show it right now. But the hand that used to rest on my knee wasn't resting anywhere near me anymore. He stopped sitting with me in the evenings. The cooking show stayed paused on episode 4 for 3 weeks running. He stopped asking how my physical therapy consultations had gone, stopped asking whether the pain was better or worse, stopped doing any of the small checking in things that you don't notice until they disappear. I watched him from across the apartment sometimes while he was on his phone. He had this way of smiling at the screen, a quick, private smile, the corners of his mouth moving before he'd even registered he was doing it. I hadn't seen that smile in weeks, and I was watching him give it to his phone. I should have said something, asked him directly. I know that now. But when you're sitting in a wheelchair with both legs in casts and you're dependent on a person for a significant portion of your daily functioning, confrontation feels like a gamble you can't afford to lose. So I kept quiet. I watched. I told myself I was imagining things. I was not imagining things. 8 weeks into my recovery, a Thursday. I remember that specifically. Thursday because I'd had a physical therapy consultation call that afternoon, and I was making notes on my laptop about the exercises I'd need to start. It was almost 10 at night. Callum had texted at 6 to say he was working late. I'd said, okay, put on the TV, made myself dinner. Cereal, honestly, because I was tired and maneuvering around the kitchen in a wheelchair for a real meal wasn't worth the effort. I was sitting in my chair with my laptop open and my notes spread across the tray table. I heard the key in the lock. Something made me reach over and pick up my phone. I don't know what exactly. Call it instinct. Call it the part of your brain that's been quietly cataloging things for weeks and finally sends up a flare. I opened the voice memo app and hit record, then set the phone face down against my laptop where it wasn't visible. The door opened. Callum walked in. And then Vivian walked in behind him. I knew who she was. She and Callum had dated for about a year before we met. Nothing dramatic, it had ended mutually, he told me. We'd run into her once at a work event maybe 4 years ago. She'd been perfectly pleasant. Dark hair, confident posture, the kind of woman who always seems to know where she's standing. Her arm was around his waist. His hand was on her lower back. They both stopped when they saw me. Callum didn't look horrified. He looked, and this is the part I still think about, annoyed. Like I was an inconvenience, like I had done something wrong by being in my own living room. Clara. Just my name. Flat. Hi, I said. My voice came out completely calm. I don't know how. Vivian looked at the wheelchair and then looked at Callum with an expression I couldn't fully read. She took a small step back from him, but kept her hand at her side. Callum looked at me for a long moment, and then something seemed to break loose in him, like he'd been holding a door shut and just decided to let it go. Look, he said, this has been a long time coming, okay? You have to know this hasn't been working. Has it not? I said. He stopped, started again. You're completely worthless right now, Clara. I mean that. Every part of you is broken and useless. You can't even... He gestured vaguely at me, at the chair, at my legs. You can't even satisfy me anymore. I didn't sign up for this. The room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. I looked at him, then at Vivian, who was examining a point on the wall somewhere above my head, then back at him. Okay, I said. He blinked. He'd expected something else. Crying, maybe. Screaming. Okay? He repeated. I heard you, I said. I think you should leave. He left. She left with him. I sat in the dark for a while, not moving. Then I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and played it back. His voice was clear, every word. I listened to it twice. Then I called Joanna. She picked up on the second ring. Clara, it's almost 11. He walked in tonight with Vivian, I said. His ex, her arm around his waist. And then he told me I was worthless and broken and couldn't satisfy him anymore. Silence. He said what? I have it on a recording. More silence. Then, I'm coming over. Joanna, it's late. You don't have to. I'm already putting my shoes on. Don't argue with me. She was at my door by 7 the next morning, still in her pajama pants under her coat, holding 2 coffees from the place on the corner. She sat down on the floor next to my wheelchair, not on the couch, not at the table, on the floor, so we were at eye level. And she said, Okay, play it for me. I played her the recording. She listened to the whole thing without saying a word. When it ended, she sat very still for a moment. Okay, she said. Her voice had gone quiet in a way I recognized. Joanna had a certain kind of quiet that meant she was thinking very fast and very hard. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to do this right, not fast. Right. Joanna. He wants quick. He's going to want to push you into some fast settlement while you're still in a wheelchair and can't fight back properly. We are not giving him quick. She pointed at me. You said you have that recording. I do. Good. That doesn't leave your phone. You send it to yourself in an email right now and you save it in every place you can think of. I did it while she watched. I sent it to my personal email, my business email, and to Joanna's email while she read me her address out loud. Then we sat together at the kitchen table and went through what I knew about our finances, joint savings account, his income, my freelance income, the lease in his name, which I had not thought about until that exact moment and which landed in my chest like a stone. I need an attorney, I said. Yes, you do, Joanna said, and I know exactly who to call. She went through her contacts while I drank my coffee. Outside the window, the morning was doing nothing particular. People were walking dogs. A kid rode a bike. The world was just going about its business, completely unbothered by the fact that mine had just come apart. Thorne and Associates, Joanna said, turning her phone toward me. "Marcy Thorne. She handled my cousin's divorce. She's good. She's not cheap, but she is very, very good." I looked at the name. Then I picked up my phone and called. Marcy Thorne had a voice like someone who had heard every possible version of every possible story and was no longer surprised by any of it. Efficient, direct, not unkind, but not interested in sitting with feelings when there was work to do. Our first consultation was 2 hours on the phone. I told her everything: the accident, the recovery, the shift in Callum's behavior, the night he walked in with Vivian, the recording. "The recording is valuable," she said, "but I want to be clear. It's not a silver bullet. Depending on your state's recording laws, there may be limitations on how it can be used. What will actually carry this case is documentation of the financial situation. What do you have access to?" "Our joint checking account. I can see the statements." "Pull everything. Last 12 months minimum. I want to see spending patterns, unusual withdrawals, anything that looks like money being moved. Can you access tax returns?" "Our shared folder on the computer. Yes. Get them. I also want documentation of your medical expenses and any out-of-pocket costs you've incurred during recovery. Every receipt, every copay, every prescription." "That's going to be a lot of paper," I said. "Good," she said. "I like a lot of paper. Paper is evidence. Paper is what wins." I spent the next 4 days building a folder. Joanna came over every evening after work and sat at the table with me while I pulled statements, printed records, organized everything into labeled sections. It was slow work. I couldn't stand at the filing cabinet for long and my back ached after too many hours in the wheelchair. But it was also the first time in weeks that I felt like I was doing something, moving forward instead of just sitting still getting worse. We made a system. Joanna handled the printing and physical organization. She has a color-coding habit that borders on obsessive, and in this case, it was genuinely useful. I handled the digital side, pulling records from the bank portal and the tax software, and my freelance invoicing system, and sending everything to a separate email account I'd created, specifically for this that Callum had no access to. The bank statements were interesting. Starting about 3 months before the accident, which I would later understand was approximately 6 weeks after Callum had reconnected with Vivian, though I didn't know that timeline yet. There were cash withdrawals I didn't recognize. Not huge amounts, but regular. Once a week, sometimes twice, between $40 and $80 each, taken from ATMs I'd never used, restaurant charges at places I'd never been, and one hotel charge, a specific place downtown, on a Friday night in February, that I had absolutely no memory of. I put a red circle around every single one of them. "Look at this," I said to Joanna on the 3rd night, pushing the January statement across the table to her. She picked it up, scanned it. Her finger stopped on the hotel line. She looked up at me. "That's the Embassy Suites on Marcellus," she said. "I've been to an event there. That's not a cheap place." "No," I agreed. "It's not." "And you didn't go to anything there." "We did not." She put the statement down. "Okay," she said. "Okay, that's in the file." She picked up the red pen, right next to the cash withdrawal from the same weekend, which I am also circling. I watched her circle it. There was something clarifying about watching it happen, about the act of making it visible, making it real, putting a mark on it so it couldn't be unseen. Thorne reviewed everything in our second call and said, "Good, you've done well. Keep going. And one more thing. I want you to write down every conversation, every interaction with Callum, every time he contacts you starting right now. Date, time, what was said, exactly." I started a notebook that night. First entry, last Thursday, approximately 9:58 p.m. Callum arrived home with Vivian. He said the following words, and I wrote it all out. Every word. From memory and from the recording. Every syllable he'd said, preserved on paper in my own handwriting. Permanent and real. I filled 2 pages that first night. Then I closed the notebook and sat with my coffee going cold and thought, this is the work. This is how you do it. Not screaming, not falling apart, just writing it all down and handing it to someone who knows what to do with it. It was Joanna who heard it first. She had a wide network. She'd grown up in this city, knew people everywhere, the kind of person who always seemed to know somebody who knew somebody. About 2 weeks into our document building phase, she called me on a Tuesday afternoon, sounding careful in a way I recognized. "I heard something," she said. "I don't know if it's useful or not, but I think you should know." She'd run into a woman named Bev at the gym, a mutual acquaintance, someone on the edges of both their social circles. Bev had mentioned that Vivian had apparently been bragging to people, saying she and Callum had been together for over a year, that the relationship had started well before my accident. "If that's true," Joanna said, "it changes the timeline significantly. It means he was cheating before the crash, not after. That could matter legally." "Did Bev have anything concrete?" "She said she has screenshots, text messages that show the earlier date." I called Thorne. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "It could be useful if it holds up, but I want to verify it before we get excited. Can you meet this Bev person in person and get the screenshots directly?" I rented an accessible vehicle, one of those minivans with a ramp, and drove to meet Bev at a diner about 20 minutes away. With printed screenshots. The messages with printed screenshots. The messages looked damning. Timestamps from over a year ago, Callum's name in the header, texts that were clearly romantic. I photographed everything and sent it to Thorne that same afternoon. Then I waited. Thorne called me 3 days later. Her voice was flat in a specific way. "The screenshots are fabricated," she said. I felt the bottom drop out a little. "What?" "The metadata doesn't match. The file creation dates on the images are from last week. Whoever made these used a message editing app. There are several available online and generated fake screenshots. They look convincing, but they don't hold up under any kind of scrutiny. Bev sent me fake evidence." "Someone sent you fake evidence through Bev. Whether Bev knew they were fake or was used as a go-between, I can't say, but I'd guess the latter. Someone wanted you to bring fabricated documentation to your attorney and potentially taint your case." I sat with that for a minute. "Vivian." "That would be my guess," Thorne said. "She's smart. If you'd submitted those without verification, it could have raised serious credibility questions about everything else you've brought me. It would have been a significant problem." 2 weeks. Lost. And a scare that the whole thing could have been derailed before we'd even really started. I had to sit with the frustration and then set it down. Thorne said, "Regroup. Keep building what we have. Don't reach for anything we haven't verified ourselves." I went back to the notebook, back to the bank statements, back to what was real and provable. The divorce papers arrived on a Wednesday. A process server buzzed my apartment at 10 in the morning. I wheeled myself to the door, signed for the envelope, and brought it back to the kitchen table. I sat there for a moment before I opened it. The filing was aggressive. His attorney was arguing that I was unable to contribute financially to the marriage, which was not true. My freelance income hadn't stopped, and that my disability had rendered the marriage untenable. He was claiming the apartment, citing the lease being in his name. He was pushing for an expedited settlement. He wanted this done fast before I could build anything. I read every page twice. Then I took out my phone and photographed every single one of them. Then I called Thorne. "I have it," I said. "I expected something like this," she said. "The speed is intentional. He wants you overwhelmed and underprepared. Good news, we are neither. He's going after the apartment. He can try. His name is on the lease, but marital assets are a different question than whose name is on what. We're going to file our counter-response within the week. I want to address the financial claims directly, and I want to document your income independently. Can you get me your freelance contracts and invoices from the past year?" I had them all. I'd kept meticulous business records. That was just how I worked, even before any of this. I pulled together 3 years of contracts, invoices, payment confirmations, tax filings. brought them to Thorne's office in the accessible vehicle, folders stacked on my lap. Her paralegal spent 2 hours with me going through everything. Walking out, wheeling out, of that office, I felt something shift. Not confidence exactly. More like, I know what I'm doing. I know what I have. And I know what he doesn't know I have. That feeling was fragile, but it was mine. The knock came on a Friday afternoon, around 3. I wasn't expecting anyone. Joanna was at work. I wheeled myself to the door thinking it was a package delivery. It was a woman I didn't recognize. Late 40s maybe. Dark hair like Vivian's but cut shorter. A jacket that looked like she'd put it on in a hurry. She looked uncomfortable in the specific way of someone who has decided to do something they know is going to be awkward and is committed to doing it anyway. "Clara?" she said. "Yes." "My name is Vera. I'm Vivian's older sister." She paused. I know. I'm sorry to show up like this. I didn't know if you'd open the door. I almost didn't come." I looked at her for a long moment. "Why are you here, Vera?" She exhaled. "Can I come in for a few minutes? I won't stay long. I need you to know some things." I let her in. She sat at my kitchen table and she did not look comfortable. She kept her coat on. Her hands were clasped in front of her on the table. "I didn't know about you being in a wheelchair," she said. "Vivian told me you and Callum were basically separated before she got involved. That you'd been distant. That the marriage was already over. I believed her because—" She stopped. "Because I've believed her before, and I know better by now, but I still believed her." "Okay," I said. "She's done this before," Vera said quietly. "Not exactly this. Not with someone injured, as far as I know. But the pattern, finding men in situations where they're vulnerable or disconnected from their partners, inserting herself, becoming necessary. The relationship usually falls apart after 6 or 8 months when the usefulness runs out." She looked at her hands. "I've watched her do it twice before. I watched it destroy 2 families. I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business." "What changed?" "You're in a wheelchair, Clara, with both legs broken, and my sister walked into your home." She looked up. "That's not a gray area." She reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive, set it on the table between us. "I don't know if any of it is useful. There are voicemails from a few years ago. A man she did this to and his wife, both of them. There are some messages I screenshotted from our family group chat where she said things she probably shouldn't have put in writing. And there's a note she sent me when she started seeing Callum." She stopped again. "It has a date on it, and in it she mentions that he's finally leaving his wife. Those are her words, 3 weeks before your accident." I looked at the USB drive. "I'm not doing this for you," Vera said. "I mean, I am, but I'm doing it because I am tired of cleaning up after her, and I am tired of pretending I don't see what I see. I want it to stop." "Okay," I said, and then, because it was true, "Thank you." She nodded, put her coat collar up, let herself out. I sat at the table for a long time with the USB drive in my hand. Then I called Thorne. It was a Tuesday night, about 10 days after Vera's visit. I was at my laptop pulling together the evidence packet Thorne had asked for. The recording from the night of the confrontation was the centerpiece. Callum's voice, his exact words, clear and damning. I'd been saving it in a shared cloud folder that Callum and I had used for years to share household documents. It had been convenient. It was also something I hadn't thought through. I navigated to the folder and clicked on the audio file. The folder was empty. I refreshed. Still empty. I checked the recently deleted section. Nothing. I searched by file name. Nothing. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Callum had known the login. Of course he had. We'd shared that account for years. Our lease documents were in there, our tax returns, a folder of old vacation photos. He'd had full access and he'd used it. I called Joanna. My voice was not entirely steady. "He deleted the recording," I said. "The cloud folder, it's gone." Silence. "Okay," she said. "Okay." Did you send it to yourself by email? You sent it that first morning. I sent it to 3 email addresses, but I deleted the emails from my inbox after I confirmed the cloud save because I stopped, because I thought the cloud was enough, because I had been careful, but not careful enough. Clara. Joanna's voice was careful. The morning after, when you played it for me, do you remember? I was sitting on the floor. I thought back. My phone, flat on the table between us, the recording playing out loud, both of us listening. I had my phone out, Joanna said quietly. I had it in my hand and you know how I always record stuff I want to remember? Meetings, ideas, things I don't want to forget. It's just a habit. I hit record when you started playing it back. I didn't even think about it consciously. I sat completely still. Are you telling me, I said slowly, that you recorded the playback? I'm telling you I might have recorded the playback. It was on my voice memos. I need to check. A pause. Then, oh God, Clara, it's here. I pressed my hand flat against the table to stop it from shaking. The quality isn't perfect, Joanna said. It's a recording of a recording, but I can hear it. I can hear him. Send it to Thorne right now, tonight, and email it to yourself and back up it everywhere you can think of. Already doing it, she said. Are you okay? I will be, I said, and I meant it. Thorne called me the next morning after listening to Joanna's recording. The quality is not pristine, she said, but Callum's voice is identifiable and the words are clear. This is workable. Combined with everything else we have, this is absolutely workable. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. We rebuilt the evidence packet from scratch, stronger this time. Joanna's recording. The financial documentation. 3 years of bank statements. The unexplained cash withdrawals, the hotel charge, the restaurant receipts from places I'd never been. My freelance income records proving I was not, and never had been, financially dependent. Vera's USB drive, which Thorne had reviewed and described as unexpectedly useful, particularly the dated message from Vivienne about Callum finally leaving his wife, 3 weeks before my accident, meaning the affair predated the crash. This changes the narrative significantly, Thorne said. His filing painted you as a burden who caused the marriage to fail. What we now have is documentation of an ongoing affair that began before any of this, and a deliberate attempt to use your injury as cover to end the marriage on his terms. What does our counterfiling look like? We're asking for half of all joint assets, including the savings account, which has been substantially drawn down in ways I want to address. We're establishing your freelance business as an independent asset. We're seeking spousal support for the duration of your recovery, given that he withdrew caregiving support during a medically critical period. And we're including a claim for dissipation of marital assets based on the spending pattern. He's not going to like that. No, Thorne agreed. He is not. We filed the counter response 4 days later. I sat in my wheelchair in Thorne's office and signed my name to every page with my hand completely steady. The deposition was held in a conference room at Thorne's office building. Long table, fluorescent lighting, a pitcher of water nobody touched. Callum arrived with his attorney, a man named Greaves, silver-haired, practiced, and sat down across from me. It was the first time I'd seen Callum since the night he'd walked in with Vivienne. He looked like he'd been sleeping badly. He'd shaved, but not well. He was wearing a suit that needed pressing. He did not look at me when he sat down. His attorney looked at me in my wheelchair, and I watched him calculate. He thought he saw what he was working with. He thought he saw an injured woman with limited leverage and a quick settlement in his future. Thorne let them get settled. Let Greaves do his opening remarks. Let Callum warm up to the deposition. Relaxed, rehearsed, talking about how the marriage had deteriorated after the accident, how I had become emotionally withdrawn, how he'd been carrying the household alone. He was smooth. He'd clearly practiced. Thorne let him talk. Then she said, "Mr. Callum, I'd like you to listen to something." She played Joanna's recording on a small Bluetooth speaker at the center of the table. The recording quality was imperfect. There was ambient noise, a slight echo from the room, but his voice was clear. Every word he'd said that night was clear. The room was very quiet. Callum stopped looking at the wall above my head. He looked at Thorne. Then, for the first time since he'd walked in, he looked at me. I looked back. I didn't smile, didn't shift in my chair, just looked at him with the same calm I'd had the night he walked out my door. His attorney said, "I'd like to request a brief recess." "Of course," Thorne said pleasantly. They were gone for 22 minutes. Callum came back looking like a different person. The rehearsed ease was gone. His jaw was tight. He answered the rest of Thorne's questions in short sentences and stopped volunteering anything. On the way out, while his attorney was gathering papers, Callum stopped near my chair. He didn't crouch down. He just stood there. "Where did you—" he started. "I've been very thorough," I said. He walked out. Things started happening around the same time, the way they sometimes do. Like a knot that's been pulled in one direction until everything starts to give at once. The first thing, Vera went to the police. Not about Callum, but about Vivian's financial patterns. Vivian, it turned out, had a history of borrowing money from men she was involved with, sometimes thousands of dollars at a time, with vague promises to pay it back that never materialized. She'd done it to at least 3 men over the previous 5 years. Vera had documentation. The men had been too embarrassed to report it. Vera, apparently, was done protecting her sister from consequences. I heard about this from Thorne, who had heard about it from a source she didn't name. The second thing happened about a week later. A woman from Callum's office, someone I had never met, had no connection to, had not contacted, called Thorne's office unsolicited. She identified herself and said she had concerns about expense reports. Callum had been filing certain expenses as client entertainment, dinners, hotel charges, an overnight stay that definitely wasn't client-related, and someone at the company had flagged it internally. The woman had heard about the divorce proceedings and wanted to make sure the information got to the right people. Callum's HR department was quietly notified. I found out about this on a Thursday afternoon when Thorne called me sounding almost warm, which for Thorne was significant. "The walls are closing in on his side," she said. "I want you prepared for the settlement conversation to move quickly now. His attorney is going to want to resolve this before additional liabilities attach." "How soon?" "Within 2 weeks," she said. "Get some rest. We're in the final stretch." The settlement hearing was on a Thursday morning in the same conference room as the deposition. Callum showed up with a different attorney. The original one, Greaves, was apparently no longer available. The new one was younger, less certain of himself, kept checking his notes. Callum looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He'd lost weight. He sat with his elbows on the table and his hands folded in front of him, and he stared at the table surface. Thorne put our demands on record. Half of all joint savings, which had been significantly drained, and we were addressing that separately. Independent recognition of my freelance business assets, spousal support covering the full duration of my recovery, backdated to the day he withdrew caregiving support, a lump sum accounting for the dissipation of marital assets, the cash withdrawals, the hotel charge, the expense account irregularities. The new attorney tried to counter. He offered a lower number on the spousal support. Said the medical situation had been unforeseen stress on the marriage and should be considered contextually. Thorne slid Joanna's recording across the table. Not to play it, just the notation of it in the file, the transcript she'd had prepared. "Contextually," she said. "I think we'd all agree the situation is documented quite clearly." The new attorney looked at Callum. Callum picked up the pen. He signed every page. He didn't look at me once while he was doing it. When it was over, he stood up, buttoned his jacket with hands that weren't entirely steady, and walked out without speaking. His attorney gathered everything and followed him. I sat at the table while Thorne organized her copies. The fluorescent lights hummed. The pitcher of water sat untouched. "That's done," Thorne said simply. "That's done," I agreed. She shook my hand, firm, professional, satisfied. I wheeled myself out into the hallway and waited for the elevator and thought about the night Callum had walked into my living room with his hand on Vivian's back and said those words to me, the specific flatness in his voice, like I was a problem to be dismissed. The elevator came. I wheeled in. The doors closed. I breathed out. I woke up the next morning and the apartment was quiet. Not the heavy, loaded quiet of the past months, the kind where you're always waiting for a door to open or a phone to ring or something bad to happen. Just quiet. Morning quiet. Light coming through the curtains at a low angle. Birds doing what birds do outside a window that was now entirely mine to look out of. Callum's name was off the lease. I'd had the landlord process the paperwork 2 weeks prior, once Thorne had confirmed the settlement was coming. The apartment was mine. Fully, legally, entirely mine. I lay there for a few minutes just taking inventory of how I felt. People talk about divorce like it's either devastation or triumph, and I'd been bracing for one or the other. What I actually felt was neither. What I felt was the specific sensation of a weight being lifted that you've been carrying so long you'd stop noticing how heavy it was. Like finally putting a bag down after a very long walk and realizing your shoulders can actually drop now. I made coffee. The good kind, not the Ethiopian blend I'd been using since the accident, because it had been Callum's preference, and I'd just adopted it the way you adopt things over 7 years without meaning to. A different roast entirely. A medium Colombian I'd picked up from the farmer's market 2 weeks before and had been saving for exactly this morning without knowing that's what I was doing. I made it properly, pressed it right, poured it into my favorite mug, the big white one with the chip in the handle that I'd kept because I liked it, not because it matched anything in the kitchen. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat down. The apartment looked the same and nothing like itself. The couch was back where it had originally been. I didn't need the wide wheelchair pathways anymore, hadn't needed them for several weeks. The grab bars in the bathroom were still there. I decided to leave them actually because they were useful even now. The living room wasn't a makeshift bedroom anymore. It was just a living room. I sat with my coffee and looked at all of it and thought about the version of me who had sat in this same apartment 8 weeks into recovery, recording on her phone in the dark, going very still while her husband told her she was worthless. I felt something for her, something gentle and a little sad. She'd been so careful to keep it together, so careful to stay quiet and do the work. Good job, I thought at her. You did good. Joanna arrived at 9:30 with a box of pastries from the Good Place downtown, the one with the line out the door on Saturdays. She didn't say anything sentimental when I opened the door. She just put the box on the table, sat down across from me, and opened it. Danish, croissant, one of those almond things with the flaky edges that she always claimed she didn't like, and then ate anyway. We ate and didn't talk much. Sometimes that's the right thing. Sometimes the people who know you best know exactly when words would just get in the way. "How do you feel?" she asked eventually, pulling apart a piece of croissant. I looked around the apartment. Same walls, same couch, same morning light, different life. "Clean," I said. She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant, because she did. "Eat your pastry," she said. I ate my pastry. Month 10, after the accident, I walked out of physical therapy without the cane. Not for good, exactly. I still used it on bad days, when I was tired, when the weather changed and my legs ached deep in the bones the way they do now and probably always will. But for the first time in 10 months, I walked from the car to the building entrance, and from the building entrance to the therapy room, and from the therapy room back out, all of it, without any support. My therapist, a young woman named Britt, who'd been relentlessly optimistic for all 10 months in a way that had occasionally driven me crazy and ultimately kept me going, watched me come through the door and pressed both hands flat against her own cheeks. "Clara," she said. Don't make it a thing, I said, and then I ruined it by tearing up a little. I called my mother from the parking lot. She cried. I told her not to. She cried more. The freelance business had grown during the recovery in ways I hadn't expected. Turns out, when you're working from bed with nowhere to go, you answer emails faster and put more care into every project. I delivered work ahead of schedule for every client during the recovery period. 3 of them had referred me to others. By the time the settlement finalized, I had 8 new clients I hadn't had before the accident. I was making more money than I'd made at any point during my marriage. One night around that time, I sat down and built a website. Simple, clean, professional. I called it something plain, a name about disability rights and divorce and protecting yourself during a medical crisis. I wrote about my experience, anonymized but honest. The betrayal, the legal battles, the importance of documenting everything, the financial vulnerabilities nobody tells you about, the specific cruelty of someone using your injury as an excuse to abandon you. I offered free initial consultations. Within a week, I had 3 inquiries. Within a month, I had more than I could handle. Women recovering from accidents, from surgeries, from illness. Women whose partners had left or cheated or become abusive the moment the dynamic shifted and they became dependent. Women who needed someone who'd been there, who understood both what the law said and what it felt like from inside a wheelchair. I started answering every single one. 3 months after the divorce was final, I was at a disability rights workshop downtown, not as an attendee, as a speaker. I had about 40 minutes on the agenda talking about the intersection of medical crisis and divorce law, specifically about what documentation you should be gathering before you ever think you might need it, the kind of information I desperately needed and hadn't had when it would have helped most. The room was at a community center on the west side. Folding chairs in rows, a projector screen that had to be adjusted twice before it sat flat, a card table by the door with a water pitcher, and a stack of paper handouts I'd printed at the library the day before. I stood at the front, not sat, with my notes on a legal pad and talked for my 40 minutes. I talked about joint accounts and why you need independent visibility into them, about cloud storage and shared passwords as financial vulnerabilities, about documentation that doesn't live anywhere a partner can access and delete, about the specific ways that urgency gets manufactured during divorce proceedings to force bad settlements, and how injured or ill people are particularly targeted because they're exhausted and afraid and often told they don't have the energy to fight. I talked about it plainly. No drama, no performance, just what I knew, laid out as clearly as I could. Then I took questions for another 20 minutes. A woman in the second row asked what the most important thing was she could do right now before any crisis had happened. I said, know your finances completely and independently. Know every account number. Know where the statements live. Know the balances yourself, from your own access, not through your partner's screen. She wrote it down with the focused attention of someone who had reasons to be paying attention. Another woman, older, somewhere in her late 60s, pearl earrings, the kind of contained posture that suggested she was used to keeping things to herself, waited until everyone else had asked their questions, then raised her hand and said, "My husband had a stroke 2 years ago. I became his caregiver. I have nothing in my own name, and I don't know how to start." I looked at her for a moment. "Stay after," I said. "I'll give you an hour." She nodded, pressed her lips together, and didn't cry, which told me she'd been holding this for a very long time. After the formal session ended and the other attendees had collected their handouts and drifted out, I found her standing by the water table. We sat together in the folding chairs while the volunteers stacked the rest of the room around us, and I told her exactly what to do, step by step, starting with the bank, starting with tomorrow morning, starting with her own name on one account that was only hers. She wrote every word down in a small spiral notebook she'd had in her purse. "Thank you," she said when I was done. "I've been afraid to know any of this." "I know," I said. I was afraid to know it too, right up until I needed it. While I was gathering my own papers, a man from the third row appeared near my table. 40s, maybe a few years older than me. He'd been taking notes the entire session, not just the listening kind of note-taking, but the working kind, the kind where you're processing and building on what you're hearing, the pen moving fast. That was genuinely helpful, he said. He had a careful, measured voice, the kind you develop when you spend a lot of time in rooms where words have legal weight. I'm an attorney, medical discrimination cases mostly. I should theoretically know most of what you covered, but the way you framed the documentation, the pre-crisis collection, the independent account question, I hadn't encountered it laid out that practically before. It comes from doing it badly the first time, I said. He smiled, just slightly. I'm Derek. Clara. We talked for a while about the gaps in the system, the ways people who became disabled during relationships were uniquely vulnerable, the ways the law's framework didn't map onto what it actually felt like to be dependent and frightened and trying to think strategically while in physical pain. He asked smart questions and actually listened to the answers, which I'd learned to notice because it was rarer than it should be. The volunteers stacked the folding chairs around us. We moved to the hallway. Eventually, we moved to the coffee shop across the street and talked for another hour and a half. I was not in a rush. I was also not closed off. Both of those things were true at the same time, which was new. For a long time after everything with Callum, I'd been either sealed shut or anxious about what came next. Somewhere in the past 3 months, it had settled into something more balanced. Something that felt like, I know who I am now, and that's enough to start with. He asked if he could reach out, maybe explore whether there was space for his practice and my consulting work to collaborate. I said yes. I gave him one of my new business cards. Clean design, just my name and the website. Joanna called me the following week. She'd heard through 2 different people that Callum was working retail, an electronics store, apparently, one of the big chains. The company had let him go quietly once the expense account situation had finished working its way through HR. She said it in a tone that wasn't triumphant, just factual, the way you'd report a weather change. Vivian had 2 civil suits pending. Vera had provided documentation to the attorneys handling both cases. I thought about Vera at my kitchen table with her coat still on, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else and doing the right thing anyway. I hoped it brought her some peace. I hoped it cost Vivian something real. I sat with the Callum information for a moment, tried to feel something more specific about it. Mostly what I felt was tired, not the desperate, exhausted kind, but the long-finished kind. Like after a very long project that had finally been submitted and graded and put away. He had looked at me, sitting in a wheelchair with both legs shattered, and decided that was the measure of me. He had looked at what I was going through and seen only what I couldn't do. He'd been so certain he was right about that. People who mistake circumstances for character tend to be surprised when the circumstances change. I set it down. My legs still ached sometimes, still had the scars, visible ones from the surgeries, straight lines on both thighs, faded a little more each month, invisible ones in the places that don't show on any scan. But I moved through the world under my own power now. I walked into rooms and stood at the front of them. I talked about what I knew, and I helped people protect themselves the way I'd had to learn to protect myself, the hard and expensive way, from the inside of a wheelchair at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. That was what I'd built from it. That was my answer to everything he'd said. Not the legal settlement, though that had been exactly what it needed to be. Not his financial ruin, though that had arrived as its own quiet punctuation. My answer was just this. The woman standing at the front of a folding chair room telling other women what they needed to know. The consultations and the phone calls and the website and the careful, steady work of being useful to people who needed it. I walked out of the community center that evening into cool air and a sky gone deep blue at the edges. No cane, no chair, just my feet on the pavement, steady and deliberate, going exactly where I chose. He had said I was worthless, broken, useless. Every single step I took after that was my answer. And I never looked back. if this story resonated with you. Leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes, one word is enough to say you were here.